very, very good. So I would like to start and open this webinar. My name is Charles Tapp. I am the Manager of Partnerships and External Relations at the Global Partnership for Education Secretariat. This is, I think, the second in the GPE Webinar Series. It started last month, and it's been based on a demand expressed by our partners, and particularly our partners from our partner countries, for additional opportunities for knowledge and good practice exchange. And so this monthly webinar series, which is still somewhat in its infancy, we're sort of aiming to foster and drive knowledge exchange and sharing good experiences across and through the partnership, and also aiming to support the realization of our strategic goals, but also most importantly looking to help try and achieve national objectives in partner countries. And so the webinar today is focused on early childhood education. And since 2002, right at the genesis of the Global Partnership, and then previously known as the EFA Fast Track Initiative, and the partnership, we've invested $80 million in technical and financial support to strengthen early childhood education and care in GPE countries. And we have aligned our new strategic plan through to 2020 with SDG 4, and we have made a very, very specific commitment to improving equity and quality in pre-primary education and supporting improvements in learning and developmental outcomes for young children. And our sense is that if we're able to exemplify countries where support to early childhood education and care has yielded good results, that will really help us drive progress in this area across GPE countries. So today's webinar is called The Road Towards Quality Early Childhood Education: Experiences from Moldova and Zambia. And presented today are two very different country-level experiences, from building the basic architecture needed to support all other early childhood care and education efforts, to institutionalizing early childhood care and education service, and developing efficient public-private partnerships aimed at scaling up quality early childhood care and education services while ensuring equitable access to early education for all young boys and girls. And these are going to be complemented by a short presentation at the end from the GPE Secretariat on a new initiative from the partnership to build better early learning and development at scale. And that has the delightful acronym of BELDS. And we will try and avoid acronyms in much of our conversation today. So we're delighted to have with us to present today, firstly, Her Excellency Corina Fusu, Minister of Education for the Republic of Moldova and the Deputy of the Parliament of the Republic of Moldova. The Minister was previously member of the Municipal Council of Chisinau and Editor-in-Chief of the portal Europa in Moldova. She was author and presenter of the show in Romanian and French languages, La Francofia, broadcasted by the company Teleradio Moldova. Minister Fusu will be sharing Moldova's successful experience in early childhood education practices, describing teacher training, provision of equitable access to preschool programs in rural areas, and the provision of access to early childhood programs for children with special needs in Moldova. Ms. Larissa Vertosu is the Early Childhood Development Officer from UNICEF in Moldova, and she's joining Minister Fusu in the presentation. Ms. Vatosu started her career in the UN system back in 2001, bringing 10 years of experience in innovative and creative approaches in pedagogical practices at high school and university levels. She was employed as the Education for All country advisor by UNDP Moldova and also UNESCO's Moscow office. And later was the Early Childhood Development Officer for UNICEF in Moldova. And graduated with honours from Balti Pedagogical University and was also a PhD fellow at the State University of Moldova. And also very pleased to have, and just come online, Martha Makwani Sitali. It's a third panelist for today's presentation. And she'll present Zambia's experience of creating a directorate of early childhood education and developing a national policy and its accompanying implementation plan. And Ms. Makwani Sitali is Senior Education Officer for Early Childhood Education in the Early Childhood Education Directorate, Ministry of Education in Zambia. Worked as a teacher of the English language and literature for 10 years before joining the ministry. And from 2013 to 2015, she was assigned the responsibility for coordinating early childhood education activities in the ministry prior to the exciting establishment of the Early Childhood Education Directorate in 2015. And she will be joined by Ms. Given Wanakatwe Daka, and I hope I got the pronunciation of that one right. She's an education specialist in the UNICEF Zambia country office and responsible for UNICEF's early childhood development program in Zambia. And she's worked in government development agencies, including working with the Netherlands Embassy, and has got over 20 years working in the education sector in Zambia. Finally, I'm delighted to introduce Alexandra Rocha Solano, who's sitting just next to me here. And she's going to be presenting on GPE's support to early childhood care and education and what kind of support GPE can provide to member countries who would like to develop and implement such interventions, similar to those in Moldova and Zambia. Alex is an education specialist here at the GPE, and she helps manage a portfolio of member countries with GPE grants and providing technical support to sector work. And also she has the responsibility for coordinating early childhood care and education work across the partnership. She was previously in the Ministry for Social Development in Mexico, the World Bank and the Inter-American Dialogue, and has many years, well over a decade, working in the education and social policy sector. You are all very lucky that you will have our colleague Ian McPherson, education specialist here in the Secretariat, is actually going to be the moderator of today's session. And also pleased to welcome Daisuke Kanazawa, who is also here, a senior education specialist, country lead for Moldova. And also Mohammed Tariq Khan is also on the line and is the GPE country lead for Zambia. So those are by way of our introductions, and I would really like to welcome everybody to this webinar. And I hope and I'm sure that it's going to be an interesting and productive session. And I sadly cannot be with you for the whole of today's webinar, but I am looking forward to hearing some of the presentations that we'll be hearing, and enjoyed recently in Paris actually having a really interesting conversation with the focal point for Moldova about some of the early childhood care and education work that you'd been doing there, which I found particularly particularly fascinating. So, Ian, I'm going to turn it over to you, mate. You're in charge, and it's your job to keep all the trains running on time throughout the length of this webinar.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles. And again, a warm welcome to everybody online and on the phone. It's always very interesting when you're in a small room with 6 people, but know that you're connected globally, so to Europe and Africa and elsewhere. So again, a very warm welcome. I would like to repeat the request made to keep your microphones muted unless and until you are making an intervention, namely a presentation. Also to signal that if you do have any connection problems, please can you email the webinar account, which is webinars@globalpartnership.org. I also need to inform you that the session is being recorded, and we will be making this available, if possible, later. For those who are connected via WebEx through their computers, when we do come to the Q&A sessions after each of the presentations, we would like to request that you send your questions via the chat function on the WebEx connection, and then these will be read out from here in Washington. So, with that, again, a warm welcome, and we are going to pass straight on to Minister Fusu and also Ms. Vertoso in Moldova for their presentation, which will take up to 20 minutes. And with your permission, I will interrupt you when there is about 5 minutes to go, just to prompt you. Okay. So may I ask our colleagues in Moldova to please share your screen? Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my pleasure to share with you Moldova's experience in scaling up quality early childhood services. Moldova has gained its independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, and since then has passed through a difficult transition period. For the first time, early education was identified as a priority in the education for all strategy in 2002. This was the first results-based policy document which targeted most vulnerable children. Given its importance in the overall development of the child, early childhood education was later included as a priority in the poverty reduction strategies and other developmental policies, including United Nations Development Framework in the period of 2002-2012. Due to advocacy efforts of UNICEF, UNESCO, and World Bank, Moldova became eligible to Education for All initiative and benefited of $13.4 grant solely devoted to the revitalization of the early childhood subsector. Education was identified as a priority in our country developmental strategies since the year of 2000. Therefore, in the period of 2000-2015, public spending in education registered a significant increase in 2012, followed by a slight decrease in 2014-2015. Once early education was identified as a priority for our country in 2002, the share of preschool education expenditures in respect to the share of the preschool education expenditures in total education registered a high increase, reaching 24% in 2014 and a slight decrease of 22% in 2015. The share of the preschool education expenditures in GDP reached 1.7% in 2014. However, the forecast for the upcoming year show a declining path leading to a share in GDP of 1.2%. The enrollment rate in yearly education programs continued to increase, reaching 85% in 2015 compared to 44% in 2000. The Millennium Development Goal target, 78%, set up for preschool was reached and exceeded in 2011 instead of 2015. However, regardless significant increase in enrollment, there is a discrepancy gap in enrollment of almost 30% between rural and urban localities. The Republic of Moldova became eligible to the Education for All fast-track initiative in 2005, and the major focus of the EFA, FTI, GPE grants was on equitable access to early childhood services of most vulnerable children, poor children, children with disabilities, Roma, and children left behind by migration, on improvement of quality through identification and use of innovation, on knowledge sharing, efficient use of funds, and consolidated partnerships. In order to reach the unreached, one of the indicators we use while selecting the most vulnerable communities was Education Deprivation Index. On the map, you could see the coverage of EFA GPE grants, highlighting all regions covered by ECE services. Access of children to quality water sources and sanitation facilities continue to remain a problem in my country. And now I am passing the floor to Larissa, representing UNICEF, coordinating agency for GPE and chair of the local education group. And I will be continuing later.
Thank you, Minister. As it has been already mentioned, one of the major focus of our interventions was placed on equity. Therefore, we have primarily targeted children from rural areas where 8% of our poor children live, children with disabilities and special education needs, and Roma, in order to decrease the resistance of professionals to inclusion of most vulnerable children into educational regular system. We have developed specific modules on inclusive education, which were used nationally while training our educators and managers of preschools. We have developed also specific methodological and didactical materials on how to work with children with disabilities, Roma children, children with special education needs, designed for use by educators and by parents. I'd like to mention here that one of our major focus in our media and our communication campaign was placed on social inclusion of most vulnerable children, specifically also on educational inclusion. As a result of all our joint efforts, by end of 2014, 40% of children with disabilities and special education needs were mainstreamed into regular preschools compared to 5% in 2006. Additionally, I'd like to mention here that in 2014, the enrollment rates in preschool doubled compared to 2000. When we started the implementation of the EFA FTA first tranche back to 2005, we had only one outdated curricula inherited from Soviet time, which focused on teacher and not on the child. Therefore, as next steps, we have developed a series of new child-centered policy documents. Among them, you could find curricula for children covering 0-7 years old, children pre-service and in-service curricula for teacher training. For the first time, we have developed early learning development standards and professional standards, which were later used by the Ministry of Education as a basis for the development of future quality standards for basic education. We have, for the first time, piloted and institutionalized community centers, alternatives to preschools, and we have developed and institutionalized regulation for those community centers. We've been able to develop the school readiness tools, etc., etc. Given to the fact that we were extremely successful in modeling innovation, a new approach to teaching and learning, we have managed to mainstream this innovation into the new Code of Education and Education Strategy 2020, which were approved late in 2014. When we started the project back in 2005, we didn't have, or we had very scarce didactical and methodological materials. Therefore, we have developed a series of methodological and didactical materials for children, for educators and parents, and a series of books for children. So I'd like to mention here that all the materials that have been developed under these interventions were translated into Russian to ensure access to information to our language minorities. So, during the first tranche of the EFA-FTA implementation, the major focus was placed on enrollment, and just a small share of finance was dedicated to improvement of quality. Starting from the first tranche and during second tranche, we have tried to train our professionals using cascade methods of teaching. So assessment done by the end of the second tranche proved that that approach was extremely inefficient, and regardless invested human and financial efforts, less than half of our professionals were able to use child-centered methodologies in their daily practices and use also the newly developed policy documents. Therefore, we start to identify innovative approaches to teaching and learning, and we decided to model mentoring for professional development at workplace nationally. This proved to be an extremely successful initiative, and as a result of this initiative, now 83% of educators applied the standards, early learning and professional standards. Almost 80% of educators applied child-friendly methodologies, and around 80% of children are on track in regard to early learning development standards. In order to ensure the sustainability of our interventions, from the very beginning, we have started to build and strengthen existing social partnerships at local level. We have managed to improve cooperation or to build stronger partnerships between preschool and local public administration, between preschool and parent associations, between preschools and academia, local and national media, etc., etc. You could find a lot of information about our interventions, developed materials, etc., etc. The link showed on the screen. It's the website of the project, which helped us to increase the visibility of the project. So under the major factors of success, I can mention the public-private and social partnerships built at national and local level. And here it's worth mentioning the exceptional links of cooperation being built between UNICEF as the lead coordinating agency and World Bank as administrator of the grant. It's another factor was involved an empowerment of communities, which helped us to produce the change at the local level. I'd like to mention also that when we started the project, the cross-sectoral cooperation in Moldova was at an embryonic stage. So in order to improve it, because early childhood development doesn't cover just education, we have used early childhood education program as an entry point to build the cross-sectoral cooperation between education, between health, and between child protection. As a next step, we have developed a special module on child development and set up around 1,000 cross-sectoral community teams, which comprise educators, social and medical assistants, and all these cross-sectoral community teams were trained on how to pass the same message on the importance of early childhood development to local public administration, to parents, etc., etc. I'd like to mention also that in addition to 30 million grant received from GPE Secretariat, UNICEF, we did the additional complementary fundraising. And I'm proud to mention here that with legal support, we have managed to cover the needs of 60% of our children in cognitive choice. With the help of IKEA, we have managed to set up 50 community centers in localities without preschool. Romanian government have additionally provided an amount of $20 million for rehabilitation of our kindergartens. By the end of the project, we have learned that ownership of the project interventions at community level ensures sustainability of our interventions. The child-centered approach triggered a reconceptualization of the early childhood education, and new public-private and social partnerships helped us to build new partnerships around ECD and move the agenda forward. However, regardless achieved results, we do still have, or we do still face challenges. We still have 150 rural localities without preschool. The discrepancy gap between urban and rural enrollment is still increasing, reaching 30%. Only 40% of children with disabilities and 21% of Roma young children attend regular preschool. The data of our late mix, the latest data of mix proves that only 30% of 35-year-old children are on track on literacy and numeracy. Only 29 of caregivers reach their children every day, and which is really very, very striking. 16% of children under 1 year of age are beaten. So the cross-sectorial cooperation is still weak. So, and now I'll pass the floor to the Minister of Education, Corina Pusu, who will try to explain how is the government going to face these challenges, please.
Thank you so much, Larissa, for this very good presentation. Now I would focus on next steps to be undertaken in order to ensure universal access to quality early childhood development services and the right to early education for every child. And this will be done in cooperation with our major partner, UNICEF. Recently, Ministry of Education, in cooperation with UNICEF and PricewaterhouseCoopers, launched a study on costing ECD services. It is major findings and the standards package of education services under development will be used for the development of a per capita funding formula at preschool level. Currently, we are in the process of revision of early childhood education curriculum and its alignment to the early learning and development standards for children. The approval of bylaws on mentoring will ensure further institutionalization of innovation, its scale up and sustainability of the service. The revision of the criteria and procedure of disability determination and its adjustment to the ICFCY will ensure the social inclusion, including education inclusion of children with disabilities. We will also support the launch of media campaign on positive partnering, which will have a positive impact on improving social norms. In order to improve poor parental knowledge and skills on positive parenting, we have developed a national cross-sectoral strategy on positive parenting pending the approval of the government, and we will support the development, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the National Action Plan. In order to ensure continuity of services based on a study on demand and the supply of services for children under 7, undertaken with UNICEF and UN Women, will support the development of a legislative and normative framework of services for children under 3, including private services. The major findings of the study on OSH for preschool level, undertaken with UNICEF support, will be used by national and local authorities to improve access of young boys and girls in rural preschool to quality water sources and sanitation. I'd like to end our presentation with a quote of James G. Jackman, Nobel laureate on importance of investments in early childhood. Governments should redirect investments on skills towards early childhood. Early investments, particularly in children from low-income backgrounds, should be followed up by later investments in order to remain effective. In conclusion, I would like to mention that the GPE project was one of the best models of cooperation in education that could be extended beyond the subsector. On behalf of the government of the Republic of Moldova, I would like to convey our gratitude to the GPE Secretariat, the Old Bank, and UNICEF for provided support, which had a very positive impact on the development of Moldovan young boys and girls. We are looking forward to a further successful cooperation to ensure universal access to early childhood services and scale up innovation throughout the sector. Thank you for your attention.
Minister and to your UNICEF colleagues, thank you so much for a really fascinating presentation. And I know that the team here has enjoyed it enormously, and as have those who are online, and there are lots of questions that I'm sure we'll be looking forward to asking. I have to leave, I'm afraid, to go to another meeting. But I just wanted, Minister, particularly to thank you for your time today and for the presentation, and also to compliment you and your government on a really quite extraordinary effort and exercise you've undertaken, and it has been truly an honour from the Global Partnerships perspective to be able to work and support your government and UNICEF and the bank and others, but particularly your government in the work that you've been doing. So thank you very much indeed. And to you and to other colleagues on the line, I will say goodbye. And Ian, back to you, mate.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. And allow me to add my thanks to Minister Fusu and Ms. Virtosu for a very, very interesting presentation. In the interest of time, we aren't going to take any questions now. We're going to switch through to the presentation from our colleagues in Zambia, Ms. Sitali from the Ministry of Education and Ms. Daka from UNICEF. What I would invite all of you to do, however, is to please send your questions via the chat function on WebEx. May I ask our Zambian colleagues to share their screen? And just while that happens, I'm going to capitalize on my role as moderator just to make two very brief observations on what we have just heard from our Moldovan colleagues, which are these. The first is that it's very striking how you have been able to both gather and use data. And this is a really significant point, and I would be interested maybe when we come back to the questions to get your reflections on how the ability to gather very specific and disaggregated data has helped you to inform your planning and your next steps. And my second point is this, that even though we kind of has been speaking in the broad rubric of a public-private partnership, it's very notable, and it's the first time I've heard the expression public-private and social partnership. And then also to note that you have been engaging in complementary fundraising with private foundations, IKEA and Lego, as well as other governments from the region. And in addition, with the private sector, such as PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I find this really fascinating, and really what we're talking about is very much a multi-stakeholder partnership within the Moldovan space. So anyway, some quick observations. Is Zambia able to share their screen so that we can pass over to that presentation? If not, we do have the presentation here in Washington that we can bring up, and we will have to invite our Zambian colleagues to prompt us when they would like us to move through to the next screen. I think is that the route? And may I ask again, all of our other colleagues online or who have dialed in to kindly mute your microphones so that we can hear our colleagues in Lusaka.
Are we able to? Are we sharing our screen?
But if you like, we can share it on your behalf. We can do it from our side.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to share it from our end, and I think you might have to prompt us when you would like us to move through to the next screen. So we're going to move through to that. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. May I now welcome
We seem to have lost sound from Zambia. I think we had Ms. Sitali from the ministry. Can you hear us?
Can you hear us now?
Okay, you're back. Yes, please. On you go.
Okay, thank you very much. May I welcome you to this presentation from Zambia. We are going to share our experiences in our road towards policy development for early childhood education. I'll start by giving the outline, where we will share how Zambia built its EC policy and the implementation plan. I'll also give a context and background before the EC policy, what the environment was like before the EC policy was developed, and also the process of developing the EC national policy, what was involved in the
I'm ever so sorry to interrupt, but the sound quality is really very poor. That seems to be better. I don't know if there's anything that you're able to do at your end, but immediately now the feedback seems to be better. Can you hear us okay?
Yes,
no, you're very clear from our end.
Oh, now you are super clear. Please, whatever you're doing, keep doing it from now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, yes, so I was just giving an outline of the presentation. So I'll start by giving the context and background before the EC policy was put in place. I also moved to the whole process of developing the EC policy and the challenges that we faced, the lessons that we learned, and then we'll end by going at looking at what is needed going forward or what the next steps are. So to begin with, I want to share that the need for early learning was recognized as far back as 1977 with the landmark of the education reforms. Before these education reforms, early childhood education, or as it was called preschool, was merely some informal arrangements where children were sent to some welfare centers. But really there was no policy framework that was regulating its provision. So with this landmark reform, it saw the provision and funding of preschool education in the hands of local authorities. And the local communities were also empowered to run these preschool centers, as well as the private individuals. But when we look at the running agencies, there was very little focus on school readiness. These were merely places perhaps of play while the parents are engaged in some socio-economic activities. It gave the parents or the mothers more time to do their work. So there was no policy framework, and participation was governed by the Day Nurseries Act of 1957. So this was a long time ago. There was need for some new regulation to be put in place. After the...
Okay, can you move on to the next? Hello?
Okay, so the EC service provision, the EC service provision through local councils was not widespread, as it phased out during the 1980s. I might say the organization was not very well put, so it phased out in the mid-1980s because there was no direct government involvement. There was a policy vacuum. So all these are situations that necessitated the development of a policy framework. There was also no institutional mechanism in place for the management and delivery of early childhood education. So through that act, we saw a lot of associations coming on board, like the Preschool Association of Zambia. They were training, and the private sector also provided this service, accounting for 75% of service provision. But this segregated the rural child, the children that were from poor communities and rural communities, where the private sector catered for people that could afford to pay the fees. And most of these schools were concentrated in the urban areas. The civil society also participated mainly in service delivery and advocacy, raising awareness for the need for early childhood education. So as you can see that there was a lot of geographical and socioeconomic disparities in access to ECE, which was a major concern for government. So when we started implementation in 2014, there was only 15% of grade 1 entrants with ECE experience. We were not able to depict the number of learners that were accessing ECE experience because it was disjointed. We could only capture the figures from the grade 1 entrants that we had in our government schools. So it was only a parity of 15%, which was quite low. The status of EC before policy. There was no standardized EC curriculum. So a lot of providers had different curricula that they were following. Depending on which one they had access to, they had different curricula from different countries, from neighboring countries such as Mozambique. Others were provided from their networks that they had. And then we also had the Human Resource Challenge, where there was no standardized teacher training program. Although the government had 2 training colleges that were providing ECE training for teachers, they were not adequate to cater for all.
Hello, Zambia. We seem to have lost you.
Oh my God.
Can you hear us again? Hello? Hello?
Network.
Hello?
You need to help.
Hello? Hello?
It's showing connected. Okay. Are we back? Yeah. Just a moment.
I think you're back, Zambia. I think you're back. This is Boaz Waruku and Sefa Nairobi. I think I'm hearing you. Maybe we are
Okay,
disconnected
I'm sorry
with
about
the
that.
host. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you very much. Please carry
Okay.
on. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So I was talking about the Human Resource Challenge, where the 2 government colleges that we had could not meet the demand of training. So even those that were trained were not deployed by government. So the enrollment numbers of students for ECE teachers dropped immensely. And this is because there was no regulatory and quality assurance system in place. There was no institutional arrangement and no budget provision. So this was the status before the ECE policy was put in place. Challenges in the policy process. The policy development process started some 10 years ago when through a government instrument, statutory instrument, the mandate for early childhood education was transferred from Ministry of Local Government to the Ministry of Education. So a lot of documentation had to be put in place, and so it took a long time. However, there was no government structure that was in place to lead the process of policy development. The responsibility for early childhood education therefore fluctuated between the line ministries, and these mainly were the local government ministry and Ministry of Education, without any of the ministries taking ownership or taking the lead in the process. So as we started the process in terms of conceptualization of the EC policy, the process started with a comprehensive approach, that of developing an ECCD policy, early childhood care development and development education policy. But it was narrowed down to early childhood education. So we had the challenge of coming up with a comprehensive policy, because there were a lot of players, a lot of stakeholders that had interest, for example, in the care area alone, others concentrated on development. But for Ministry of Education, our mandate is for early childhood education. So this brought a lot of fragmentation in the process. But finally, as the lead ministry, the policy was narrowed down to early childhood education. And this was due to those challenges that we encountered. Now, trying to formulate a cross-sectional policy framework caused some delays, but an agreement was reached where the policy now was developed in the area of early childhood education. The other stakeholders will be collaborated with by the ministry. So the Ministry of Education, through the policy, would regulate the provision of early childhood education and collaborate with other stakeholders in terms of the other areas of child development. So what led to this progress that we scored was the enabling environment that we experienced in 2011 when the new government came into power, and the government prioritized early childhood education, creating a new impetus for the policy development process. So by 2013, an interim institutional arrangement was put in place through the Directorate of Open and Distance Education, and an EC focal point person was assigned the responsibility to coordinate. I'm privileged to be the one that was assigned to be the focal point person at that time. So with the early childhood education interim structure in place, government assumed leadership and the policy process was therefore back on track with a lot of progress scored. In 2014, in fact, by 2014, government had introduced early childhood education teachers on the payroll. And a lot of our students that were trained way back before government took up the responsibility came back to be engaged by government. And there was a lot of motivation for students now to train as early childhood education teachers. In the same year, government also launched the National Early Childhood Education Curriculum and the National Early Childhood Education Teacher Education Program. And the curriculum was standardized for all the providers. So all private providers, training institutions are following the same curriculum. And this has made work easy for the ministry to be able to coordinate the service delivery. By 2015, Cabinet approved the establishment of an institutional mechanism, a Directorate of Early Childhood Education, which was equal in status to other directorates that were already in place. This resulted in increased capacity and accountability for the finalization of the ECE policy, because a directorate was fully charged with the responsibility to take on all the early childhood education issues. I continue with the enabling environment. There were also emerging dialogue around the low level of school performance in Zambia. The school results were not very impressive, and it was zeroed down to the foundation of early childhood education. Because while people in the private sector that had undergone early childhood education were performing better than those that had no EC experience, it was acknowledged that early childhood education formed a very good foundation, even for the other problems of low level of school performance, literacy levels, numerous levels. And so the focus now was on early literacy through early childhood education. The global environment as well contributed in that there was a refocusing dialogue on starting school early and attainment of developmental milestones. Zambia is a signatory to many international protocols, and so there was a lot of political will to be able to align ourselves to the international protocols. So Zambia, as a GPE country, through the National Implementation Framework 3, the Education Sector Plan, consensus within GPE partner countries on the importance of ECE for better learning outcomes in primary and secondary education was agreed and was realized. Zambia's international commitments include the EFA, the MDGs, and the recently put across Sustainable Development Goal platforms. So as a result of that, there was great momentum created. By 2015, 2,166 government early childhood education centers had been established together with community-based ECE through civil society organizations. And we're talking about centers that were existing within the government, the public schools, as well as community-based centers. Because of the demand, we could not afford to have centers only in government schools. The policy framework therefore led to the development of policy implementation plan, which was a requirement by cabinet, and this policy implementation plan is now in place. And costing scenarios were also included, where we had 3 costing scenarios: the high cost, low cost, and the medium cost, depending on the targets. I now invite my colleague, Given, to continue with the other parts of the presentation. Thank you very much. I'm just going to sort of talk about some of the experiences in relation to partnerships. The policy development process actually involved working with a core team of stakeholders, a technical working group, and UNICEF played a lead convening role in that framework. So an ECE technical working group comprising of local and international civil society organizations, UNICEF, and other ministries, closely supported and worked with government along the road to policy development. Now, the content of the ECE policy had also to be endorsed by other government ministries. This is actually a requirement in terms of government operations, that policy having the endorsement along all the sort of ministries was actually a requirement. So partners provided field level experience, lessons learned from modeling of services, evidence generation. For example, a mapping study was done, and also provided financial and technical assistance support. So the experiences of the partnerships in terms of implementing EC activity at the field level fed into the policy development process in terms of really bringing out lessons learned, best practice, and this contributed to the policy development process. Now, the technical working group provided a framework for building consensus on the vision, the goals, the objectives, and the strategies that are currently contained in the policy. It was through this platform, a collective platform, that there was agreement in terms of where does Zambia want to be with ECE over the next 5 years. Now, the content of the document was finalized by this technical working group under the leadership of the ministry, so it was actually quite a consultative process. The other experience that we had with regards to the partnership in the policy development process was the issue around strong advocacy, a very strong advocacy voice, pushing for ECE policy and pushing for an institutional structure to be put in place. This included high-level advocacy involving parliamentarians and ministers at the minister level, and this advocacy, sort of joint advocacy effort, was led by the Zambia National Education Coalition, which is an umbrella organization of civil society organizations. The 6th National Development Plan and the Education Act and the Education Plan also were provided a sort of a framework along which the partners were rallied around these framework documents to support the ECE policy process. Now, what have been the lessons learned very quickly? I think the lessons that we have learned in the policy development process is that 1, there is need for government high-level commitment and leadership. 2, the structure and the team has to be in place to ensure accountability for the policy development results. There is also need to have a consultative process which involves stakeholders and carrying everybody along, having a common vision in terms of where you want to be with ECE. And then also the other lessons that we learned is that competing priorities at national level result in delays. So it is easier to realize a multi-sectoral approach at district level first, and then building the policy framework. So it comes back to the issue that we raised about field level experience. And we found that it was easier to really get things done at the district level, and this fed up to the policy development process. So a strong partnership also helped to sustain a collective sense of mission and kept the focus on the goal of getting a policy in place. The other lesson that we have learned, Martha said that we narrowed down to an ECE policy. However, to continue with a holistic approach, even to ECE, one of the key lessons that we have learned is that progressing dialogue and a holistic approach requires a multi-sectoral technical working group with accountabilities, not just bringing people around, but also building in accountabilities that people, the different sectors, have to be accountable for certain components of that policy framework. Then finally, in terms of lessons learned, or second but last, is that a clearly costed implementation plan helps government have an understanding of the financing options that are feasible for them in the short term and in the long term. And finally, the political dimension in terms of lessons learned. What we have learned along the policy development process in Zambia is that to avoid ECE being shifted around with changing ministers, changing administrations, that the ECE messaging should focus on long-term benefits. What are the benefits for economic development? What are the benefits for the education and health outcomes? So that ECE assumes its own credibility, and this I think would assist in ensuring that this is not an issue that keeps shifting around with changing administrations, because that is the experience that we have had, as Martha had earlier on alluded to. So if we have 2 minutes, Martha would just wrap up in terms of moving forward. Hello, are we there?
Oh. You are there.
Okay. So I know we've run out of time, but just a few minutes to wrap up. Thank you.
Yeah, so in moving forward, we want to ensure that the policies aligned to the budgetary frameworks, such as the 7th National Development Plan and Educational Sector Plan, because this will give us the reconciliation that we need to move forward in terms of implementation of ECE. Then the ministry should also provide policy guidance and coordinate the implementation of the policy. Because as government, as Ministry of Education, we are now empowered with instruments to be able to coordinate efforts of partners, because we have the guidelines in place, the curriculum, and the policy. We also would like to strengthen partnerships with communities, churches, line ministries, civil society, private providers, in order to expand access to ECE, because government alone will not be able to meet all the needs of the children that need ECE. We would like to improve policy monitoring and evaluation so that we ensure that there's adherence to set standards. Then capacity building, want to put in place building systems and a human resource cadre for effective implementation of policy, so that we have people that are on the ground implementing this policy that we have put in place. And then linking ECE with a parenting education program that introduces the ECD element. We are also aware that we cannot bring up a child who's only focused on education, but we want that holistic approach. So by introducing the parenting program, which we already are piloting in some provinces. So that's our moving forward. Thank you very much for listening.
Great. Many thanks indeed to both of you for a very rich and interesting presentation. May I ask you to mute your microphone? Thank you so much. So again, many thanks indeed. I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping and organize ourselves, because technically we should be concluding in about 30 minutes, but seeing as we started a little bit late, I'm going to crave your indulgence and just push through for an extra 5 minutes. What we are also going to do is, having spoken with Alex, I think that what we will do is drop out the GPE presentation. We will now have some question time, but I will invite Alex just to say a few points on the BELS initiative in a minute. I'd also like to point out that we do have some other representatives and colleagues from ministries of education in Liberia and also from Honduras. And I would very much invite those colleagues to submit questions through the chat function if possible, or if in Liberia, I believe that you are dialed in, if you do wish to make an input and ask a question to any of our presenters, please do come off mute and make an input. So I believe that we have a fair amount of questions coming in to the colleagues from Moldova. So I'm going to ask our colleague Umed to just select a few, and then we will move to some questions from the Zambian presentations. And what I like to do is to kind of open it up to have at least 15 minutes for short discussion, and then I will invite Alex to make a short input. Okay? So I will, Minister from Moldova, Minister Fusu, I did pose a couple of questions to you in the interim, but maybe we can take perhaps 2 questions that have come over the chat function, and then ask you and Ms. Virtuoso to respond to those. So, Umed.
All right. Thank you very much for your active participation. We have received a number of very good questions. Due to the time limitation, so the first set of questions will be for Moldova and the second set for Zambia. The following question is for Moldova. How much do the parents pay for the ECD services?
And forgive me, Umed, if it's possible to say where the question has come from, that would be helpful.
So luckily for this question, we know who posted the question. The question is coming from Dennis Conway. So I'm repeating the question.
I'm sorry, in Moldova, if you could mute your mic. Thank you.
Okay. So the question is from Dennis Conway. The question is, how much do the parents pay for the ECD services? Is government funding is sufficient to ensure quality ECD services for all?
Let's take one more.
Right. And the next.
We'll just take one more.
One more question. The next question is from Milan. What sort of private-public partnership have happened with local Moldovan companies / institutions?
Okay, if we could pass over to our colleagues in Moldova for some responses to those questions.
Okay, I have consulted the minister and our colleagues from the Ministry of Education, and our answers are as follows. Currently, ECE services are free of charge in Moldova, but nevertheless, parents pay around 1/3 for food, for alimentation. But this doesn't mean that the amount paid by the state and by parents is sufficient to meet nutritional status of children. The recent findings of the study on costing show that the investments of the state should be tripled in order to meet the developmental needs of children. Okay, and now the second question regarding to public-private partnerships built at local level. We have built a very efficient partnership with Moxel. This is a famous telephone company. With the help of this private company, we have rehabilitated a couple of preschools, and also we've been very successful in engaging private business in supporting the rehabilitation of our preschools in rural areas. We had very interesting experiences when private sector came to the local public administration saying that they will support the rehabilitation of the kindergartens financially in order to create possibilities for women to place their children in kindergarten and come back to work.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We are going to take 2 more questions over the chat function for our colleagues in Moldova. And I would also encourage you, if you have a question that you wish to pose to colleagues in Zambia, please do feel very free to do so, okay? So, Umed, we're going to take 2 more.
Sure. Okay, so the next question is from Maggie Zhang. The question is, who coordinates and facilitates the process of collaboration? What this is the second question from Maggie Zhang. What is the mechanism of intersectoral collaboration?
Okay, so 2 questions from one person. Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's just take one more if we can. We had 2 questions from one individual. If we could just take one more.
Okay. Well, let me see. Let me ask from a different participant. All right. This one is from Joy Milan. Is ECE in Moldova centralized or not? If so, what sort of structural arrangements have helped / challenged the ECE agenda?
Okay, I hope that last question is clear. If I could ask...
Sorry, can you...
We will repeat the question. If I could ask other colleagues to please mute or move any cell phones away from your computers. So that question...
Could you please repeat both questions again?
Of course.
Thank you.
All right. So the last question was from Joy Milan. Is ECE in Moldova centralized or not? If so, what sort of structural arrangements have helped the ECE agenda?
Okay, I hope, was that clear? So there was 2 questions, well actually there was 3. Who coordinates? What is the mechanism for coordination? And the centralized or not question. Thank you.
Okay, so it's worth mentioning perhaps that we had, as our mechanism of coordination, we had the steering committee of the GPE project, and then that steering committee was chaired by the Minister of Education, and under that committee we have representatives of all line ministries, UN, academia, and civil society. Another coordination mechanism, let's say, it was advisory group. This was kind of technical group, which later became local education group. Again, in this local education group, we had representatives of all line ministries, civil society, professionals, etc., at technical level. So I'd like to mention also that we had set up in Moldova a National Council for the Protection of Children's Rights. And under that council, which is being coordinated by the Prime Minister, we have separate working groups on parenting, children under 3, early childhood education, etc. So hopefully this answers your question. So next question was related to what? We didn't hear you very well.
The next question was related to whether coordination is centralized or not, and I think that you have begun to speak to that.
Yes.
Okay, there's some conferring. If there is anything you wish to add, please do so now. If not...
So, given to the fact that we have problems hearing you, I cannot really catch the meaning of all questions. So I'm not sure I have answered all your questions.
Okay, I think that you have answered the questions sufficiently well, and in the interest of time, we will sort of move on to some questions for our colleagues from Zambia. So, Umed, may I ask you to select a couple?
Sure. Let me unmute them first.
Maybe while Umed is just bringing that up, if I could pose a question that is similar to the one from Moldova, which is to our colleagues in Zambia. in one of the slides you mentioned costing scenarios, and what I heard was low, medium, and high, but I missed whether this was costing scenarios to parents. So I wonder if you're able to expand a little bit on the question of the costing scenarios. And maybe, Umed, we can take one other question.
Okay. This question is from Dennis Conway.
Please, colleagues, could you mute your microphones if you are not speaking, or move cell phones away from your laptops? Okay, thank you.
Hello?
Can you hear us? Alex from Zambia?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We had one question on the costing scenario. And Umed, if you could give one more over the web chat.
All right. I'm repeating, the question is from Dennis Conway. What are the challenges for addressing the children in early years? Sorry, what are the challenges for addressing the needs of the children in the early years when you are using only the education lens as opposed to a multi-sectoral lens?
Okay, the question to our colleagues in Zambia, and I hope you can hear us because we're struggling to hear you. I would ask you again, whatever you did earlier in your presentation that made the sound crystal clear, it would be great if you could do that again. But there was two questions, one on the costing scenario and one on addressing the needs of children if you are only using an education lens.
As opposed to multi-sectoral.
As opposed to a multi-sectoral approach.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you are getting us. Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. Not so well, but well enough.
Okay. Let me get the one on the costing scenarios. The costing scenarios were based on giving the different options of EC service provision as part of the requirement of the implementation plan. So the high cost was looking at the ideal situation where we have all the cost drivers such as 2 teachers per classroom, they are on payroll, they have the salaries. We also have some regular structures in place, and so the cost went to a certain amount. Then the second, the medium cost scenario, we were dropping out on a number of cost drivers. For example, instead of having 2 trained teachers per class, we drop it to 1 trained teacher and perhaps a volunteer from the community, because in those scenarios, the focus was on accessing this ECE for as many children as possible. And then the low cost is perhaps where we look at the community-based centers, where we look at structures within the community, and provision is perhaps coordinated by the ministry, but it's mostly based in the community. They provide for all the services with the ministry coordinating and providing the materials required. And then if I can take the question on addressing the holistic child, as we had indicated that in the policy development process, we did start off with the ECCDE. However, this was narrowed down to ECE, but notwithstanding that, what the policy provides is to include other aspects within the ECE and have an integrated program which includes health services, coordination with the Ministry of Health in terms of basic growth monitoring activities within the center, but also including the parenting education program, which addresses the issues around capacity building the primary caregivers to enhance their capacity for early stimulation and the provision of the care component. So yes, we do understand that in the interim, this is not probably the best, the ultimate,
But I think it is a progression. We are happy that there is a policy in place for ECE, a more holistic ECE rather than one that just focuses on learning, and we see the future as moving towards the holistic ECD programming. But for the time being, the enabling environment was not quite right to enable us to provide this the broader policy framework around ECCDE.
Great, many thanks. We're going to go to 2 more questions before we have a question from here in the room.
This question is from Joy for Zambian colleagues. How do you balance the long-term effects with short-term benefits so that politicians are incentivized to prioritize ECE? And the next question is...
Sorry, we didn't...
The question was, if I could paraphrase it, how do you balance the long-term effects with the short-term gains to ensure that there is continued political support for ECCE in education planning? And we have a second question.
And the second question is from Maggie Zhang. How do you effectively engage community groups, especially parents, including fathers?
Okay, so how do you engage community groups, in particular with fathers?
Okay. Can I? Okay. I think the issue around balancing the long-term effects and the immediate gain is something that I think Martha had alluded to, the fact that one of the priorities for the ministry now is actually to step up in terms of monitoring and evaluation and evidence generation. I think at the moment we need to really engage in strong evidence generation that would provide us with input into continued policy dialogue, evidence-based policy dialogue on the benefits to be accrued, the long-term benefits to be accrued to having more children provided with ECE. I did say that we certainly do have work to do to create, to enhance the credibility of ECE in its own right. And this is something that we certainly need to do. And certainly to be able to generate evidence that we could use, to make the case, an investment case for ECE. I'll just hand over to Martha to sort of talk a little bit on the second question around the communities and how to involve fathers and other the whole community element.
Thank you very much. Concerning community involvement, we have undertaken a lot of sensitization at community levels, where we have engaged civic leaders, village headmen, and all those village institutions that are already existing in the communities, to engage them and see their role in the ECE, Early Childhood Education Service provision. So we also have some parenting program where we have multi-sectoral teams at district levels, where we have some people from health, agriculture. So we are having this multi-sectoral approach at village level, at community level, where all the stakeholders, the fathers are involved. In fact, one of the slides that you saw in our presentation was some sign of community involvement, where we had the parents, men and women, contributing towards putting up a play park. And they were all involved, and that was the result of these elections that are going on. So we have some good teams at the village level, at community level, where fathers are also getting engaged. Thank you.
Great, many thanks. Colleagues, we're kind of running up against the time issue, for which I am sorry. And I just had to ask our colleague Kana if he could hold his question that he wanted to pose to both of you. If I could ask you please to mute your mics, I would appreciate it, because I do want to invite Alex Solano just to make a very brief input and just give some headlines on what Charles introduced at the start, which is an initiative that GPE will be taking forwards on the building early learning and development at scale. We did have a PowerPoint, but we are not going to use that. Alex will just make a few kind of quick inputs, and then we will move to close. So if I could ask you just to stay with us for another 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will conclude. And I will make a comment about the outstanding questions that we have.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I'm Alex Solano, and I work at GPE Secretariat at the Country Support Team. I'll be very brief, trying to improvise a bit and give a sneak peek of what GPE would like to do regarding helping countries, developing country partners, to develop and implement ECCE interventions and ECCE policymaking, similar to the cases that we just heard in Moldova and Zambia. So I'll skip through the background and the challenges that we had been facing regarding the fact that we haven't really strategically or systematically invested in the subsector. But after consultations, with DCPs, after talking to some foundations and developmental country partners, we've realized that we have, as GPE, have played a convening role in investing in education, in the education sector, and we want to take advantage of our global lead and try to make some important investments in early learning as well. So our response has been the Better Early Learning and Development at Scale, which is the BELDS initiative. It was just approved this past June 15th by the board, so it's fresh off the press or out of the oven. We have a concept note that was reviewed and endorsed by foundations and developmental country partners that will be collaborating with us in this initiative. The initiative it provides a convening role, and it hopes to improve knowledge and good practice of what works to ensure equitable access to quality early childhood education within education systems in our developmental country partners. It'll focus on children ages 3 to 6, addressing early learning challenges, and it will include a lot of coordination with existing experts on ECCE and developmental partners. So the activities that will entail this initiative will be developing policy and knowledge products on system approaches to ECCE. We will be having regional and cross-national workshops where we will share good practices and knowledge as well, just as similar to the one what we had, but also more in-person workshops in the countries. We hope to be able to invest more and provide more technical and financial support to strengthen education sector planning, specifically on ECCE, also build inclusive dialogue, and have some small-scale grants. So we hope that to start phase 1 later in the fall of this year. We have the approved seed money, which is not a lot, but we hope that we can get a cohort of 4 or 5 countries where we can sort of pilot these activities. So this is just a very sneak peek, and we don't have that much time, but if we will have a bigger launch of what the BELTS initiative is about, more towards August or even July, perhaps. And if you are interested, we will send all of our developmental country partners information on this launch. But for the meantime, if you think that you could use some seed money to do some education sector analysis on ECE, a costed implementation plan, some sort of policy framework, or even seed money to implement this mod pilot, then this is where BELTS could come in. So you can start to have internal consultations with the coordinating agency, the local education group, this DCP focal point, and your country lead regarding whether BELT's activities could potentially benefit you or not. I know that I haven't provided as much information and there may be a lot of questions, but we just wanted to take advantage of these two really good presentations to say GPE is on board with the importance of ECE, and we want to play a proactive role in improving ECE in all of our developmental country partners. Thank you.
Great. Alex, thank you very much. And thank you also for your kind of openness and flexibility of shifting from a PowerPoint to an oral input. I am sorry, but we are not going to be able to take any questions on the BELS presentation, purely in interest of time. I do apologize. I know that we have one. But suffice to say, as Alex mentioned, that we will, as this initiative starts to take shape and form and becomes more clearly articulated, that we will be sharing out that information. So I am going to have to draw the webinar to a close. I know that we have a number of questions that were submitted that were unable to be answered. What we will do is to clean these and include those questions in the notes that we will share on the webinar. Also to say that we will make the presentations available as well. Oh, they have been shared, but we will kind of repackage that with the note from the webinar and share that with you all. And we will also explore the extent to which we are able to have our colleagues from Moldova and Zambia answer some of the questions that have been submitted. So from myself and from our colleagues in GPE, an incredibly strong and heartfelt thanks to all of the colleagues who have made inputs from Moldova and from Zambia. I really think that the kind of the depth and the richness of what you're doing in country on ECCE is tremendous, and I really hope that for all of the colleagues who have patched in either by phone or through WebEx, that this provides some very interesting examples of good practice. And this really is one of the kind of core objectives and functions of what GPE aims to do, not only to support in-country work, but to facilitate the exchange of knowledge, which will be amplified through the BELS initiative. So in closing, I want to thank you again. I'd like to thank my GPE colleagues who are here in this room, Alex and Umed and Victoria and also Kana, and those who are not. We had Mika and Julie who have been working very hard to pull this all together. So with that, thank you again for your participation, and you will be hearing from us in follow-up to this webinar and also information about future webinars to come. So thank you very much.